Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today we finally did it. I feature quite a bit of Peavey gear on this channel because I find it to be a really good value, and I finally picked up the fabled Peavey Classic 2x12. Now, this amplifier is an all-tube amplifier from the 70s, I think. I need to do a little bit of research, but I just picked this thing up and I've been playing around with it, and it sounds really, really great. It has some issues and some quirks, but overall the tone is really, really good. We'll get there. So, why would I want this particular amplifier? Well, I've been wanting a Peavey Classic for quite a while because it's their first all-tube amplifier. Now, Peavey is known for a lot of different things, but early on as an amplifier manufacturer, they relied heavily on solid-state technology. They kind of put all of their eggs in that basket and won quite a few people over. Those offerings were really, really good solid-state amplifiers, but they found that they were losing a little bit of ground to the just straight-up old-school tube guys, and this is Peavey's answer to the Fender Tweed Deluxe 212, I believe. So this amplifier does have 4 EL84s in the power section. So that's quite a lot of juice, 50 watts in fact. And we also have 3 preamp tubes, the 12 AX7 variety. So a really common complement of tubes, very Fendery sounding, something that most people are pretty familiar with. But there's your tube complement. This amplifier does rely on a solid-state rectifier, so there is that solid-state legacy bleeding into this amplifier. And there's a whole debate about the power rectifier section being solid-state versus tube and how that affects the sound. But I've played tons of amps, some with solid-state rectifiers, some with tube rectifiers, and in all honesty, that is the smallest consideration that I could ever make when purchasing an amp. Otherwise, we have some pretty classic controls on this amplifier. Well, not so much in that we have 1-2 and 1-2 input. This is kind of a Marshall-y style, not the same layout, but even if you look at this Marshall directly behind me, there's 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. So that's interesting. But we have a bright and a normal channel, and they do exactly what that says. The brighter channel is a little brighter, a little more treble, a little louder, I would say, and the normal channel is a little quieter, more subdued, but has a really good sound. There's a little crispiness in this channel too here, we'll see, but I've got some work to do on this amplifier. I just wanted to plug it in, get a baseline sound sample with the speakers that are in it, which by the way are not original. We have some kind of cheapo Fender 12-inch speakers that were taken out of like a Fender Champ or something like that. But we'll get into that in a second. Going down the front of the panel, we have our bright volume, our normal volume, our bass, our middle, our treble, 3-band EQ, a reverb knob, which again, one of the quirks is this reverb is not working. So there's something not connected there. We're gonna take a look. Then we have a tremolo control, depth and rate. So when was the last time you saw a tremolo on a non-modeler amp? Kind of an interesting quirk, but we have the tremolo depth and rate, and finally a master volume, which again is a little ahead of its time. You find those on later Marshalls and other tube amps, but in the 70s you don't really see too many master volumes. All right, so I've gone ahead and flipped the switch. What we have here is our Peavey ST Limited. I think this is a 90s guitar, don't know the exact year. It says 91 on the back, but this is a Peavey USA guitar that I picked up not too long ago that I really like. Figured let's pair a Peavey with a Peavey and something that has a little versatility. We have a humbucker and a couple single coils, so we should be able to see what both of those pickups sound like through this amp. Our signal chain today, we have our Sennheiser E906 over on the right speaker, and then we have our Audio-Technica AT4033 condenser microphone on the left speaker, and both of those are being fed into my Focusrite 18i20 Scarlett interface, which is being captured at the computer, and then fed right into the DAW. So just for reference, I'm plugged through my guitar into my pedal board, so we do have a few pedals to try out, into the pedal board, and then directly into the Bright number 1, and it sounds like this. So a really nice, clean sound. I would call it chimey and almost Fendery. It's got a little more roundness than the corresponding 212 from Fender, but you know, it's a really good imitation of that. I've got our volume cranked up pretty high, by the way. We're on 7 and 7 for our master tones, so we have our earplugs in just in case. But this thing gets really, really loud, and right on the cleans, you can hear that bite come through. Since we're here, let's go ahead and toggle this reverb switch just to prove that it does not work. Here it is on 10. There's just the slightest hint of a reverb in there, so I can't tell if that's just residual noise in the speakers. Let's turn it all the way down and see. Yeah, there is a little tiny bit, maybe like 0.5%. It's more just like air at the end of the sound. It doesn't actually provide any reverb or echo effect that you would expect from a reverb. So we'll have to take a look. I'm gonna crank that all the way down, and our tremolo is set to 3, and you can't really hear much with the tremolo. You really have to dial it up to 7 or 8 before you start to hear it. Even there you can hear it. So, tremolo works. I'll be honest, I'm not that much of a fan of that effect, so I kick it down here and leave it out of the mix, but hey, if you really need that effect, it's built right into this amp. Let's just hear what our 3-band EQ does to the sound. I'll just go ahead. That sounds really good with that mid scooped all the way out of there. Who'd have thought? Treble? Let's bump it all the way. Not bad. I like that sound. Very subdued. Let's crank the volume a little more. So you'll notice there's no gain on this amplifier. This is just master volume and bright volume. And if you do crank that bright volume, you can get some breakup. But let's knock that back down to around 7 or 6 and add a preamp to the mix. So we have our tube screamer first. Let's go ahead and play the tube screamer through this amplifier and hear what it sounds like. all that crazy about that sound. Let's add a little more mid to it just in case that's what's... Yeah, you really got to crank this amp in order to get that drive to sound good. And I think some of that might be the crappiness of these speakers. They're not the greatest speakers. They're not terrible, surprisingly, but they're just not the greatest speakers. All right, so that was the Bright sound number 1. Let's go ahead and run through the rest of these 3 inputs and hear what they sound like. Okay, here's Bright number 2. Very similar to Bright number 1, not much variation. Let's go ahead and plug into normal input number 1 and hear what that sounds like. Right, so that's cleaner than I remember it after plugging into it the first time. Let's go ahead and hear what that last input sounds like and see if there's any variation. So nice. It's a little bit quieter, I would say, but our normal, yeah, it's right around the same, up on 7. So I can't really differentiate between Bright 1 and 2 and or normal 1 and 2. So go ahead and take those with a grain of salt, but you do have 4 inputs worth noting. So what we're going to do is swap out those speakers. We're going to clean out some of the potentiometers and take a look around, make sure there's nothing disconnected or that's funky about this amplifier. And we're going to see what it sounds like after that little bit of makeover. So once we do that, we'll run through a bit more tones, check out the back of this amplifier and see what's going on back there and do a deep dive. So stay tuned. So what you're looking at right now is the reverb tank of this amp. And I'm trying to get a good shot of it because it's up behind the power transformer and the power tubes. It's that brass, or I guess zinc coated box with these 2 wires here and here coming out, and this is the reverb tank. And if I tap it, you can hear that there's all kinds of little wires and things in there that are responsible for producing that reverb sound. Well, I'm going to be the first to tell you that I have 0 experience with this type of reverb tank, so I'm just going to leave it alone and probably have a professional look at it down the road, but I just wanted to point it out. Also of note, I only see 2 EL84 power tubes in here, so this may be the 30-watt version. There's no indication on this amp anywhere, so I just assumed it was a 50-watt version. But we do have a power transformer there, and one right there, and a solid-state rectifier maybe is behind this gold tube here. Well, again, not 100% sure, but not too much to see under the hood here. I assume that more is behind this Peavey logo and this plate, but I'm not in the mood to tear this apart, so let's take a look at what we got. I added these 2 speakers, vintage Sun Transducer 128 GSP dual 12 speakers, and these are speakers that I've featured on this channel before. And the reason for that is because one of these has a brand new cone, and you can actually see this cone is a little darker than this one, which is the original vintage cone. So 2 vintage speakers, 1 brand new cone. Let's go ahead and plug this thing in now that we have some real speakers in here and hear what it sounds like. All right, so I've got this amp all back together. I didn't take it all apart just because that reverb tank made me a little bit nervous. So I just went ahead and swapped the speakers. We have our vintage transducer 128Gs in there, and we have them wired in serial. So right out of the box, these speakers give this amp new life, and it really adds to a level of quality and depth in the sound that I was really expecting out of this amplifier. Just for reference, here is one of those Fender speakers that I took out of there. You can see just a tiny little magnet and just real cheapo type deal. I don't know, these speakers aren't terrible, but they're just stamped, probably made in China. 8 ohm speakers. nothing special. So with these vintage speakers in this vintage amplifier, we have a formidable pair. I went through each one of these pots with some deoxit, and it did clean up some of the crackliness in there, but there's still some weirdness that is mostly on our bright volume switch. So we'll have to mess with that and see what it sounds like. But here we go. So, very nice cleans. So, I just cranked the reverb up, if you noticed, and it didn't really make a difference. Just adds the slightest bit of reverb, so I'm going to go ahead and keep that cranked up, but we're going to leave everything as is. Bass is at 8, middle is at 4, and treble is around 3. So those are the settings that I've kind of determined sound the best. And if you'll notice, I'm in input number 2. I just wanted to see if it provided any differences, and honestly, I can tell you right now that it does not. Input 1 and 2 are identical. I am interested in whether you can jumper this thing like you can a Marshall amp, so we'll have to take a look at that later on. But here are our clean tones in a single coil with these new vintage speakers in here. So the single coil pairs very, very nicely with this amplifier and these speakers as well. And I don't know, I don't think that there's any surprises there. Let's go ahead and add some dirt. Here's the tube screamer in the humbucker. So that's really trebly. Let me see if I can dial some of that out. Pretty admirable with the tube screamer. That amount of gain seems perfect for this amplifier. Let's go ahead and see if we can get a little more gain just using the onboard controls. So back to the clean. Our volume is at around 7.5, 8. Let's see if we can get a little more gain just by dialing up the volume. So there you heard firsthand. That quieted down quite a bit. There's something going on with this pot where if you just kind of hit it up, found the sweet spot. So the deoxit did not clean that up. It's still a little fuzzy. So I think this pot might be going bad, might need to swap that out. But if we can find the sweet spot, so there you go, cut out, but you heard a little bit of what was going on. I can't say that this amp is a high gain monster. That's not what it's built to do. It is really designed to be a Fender style sound, and we don't associate Fender with high gain sounds. So there you go. But let's go ahead and hear what our normal input sounds like now that we've swapped a few things, including the speakers. Really warm with that single coil. I like it. I think the humbucker is my preference, as it usually is. So let's see if we can bump the gain up on this channel and get a little more gain out of this amp. Kind of gross sounding, not what I would call a real hard driven amp. It's driven hard, but not in the good way. So what happens if we just raise the master volume? Wow, this thing stays clean really, really high up on this dial. So really usable tones across the board. Will it do high gain and metal? Probably not, but it's got a lot of versatility and it is a pretty good pedal platform as long as you're not going into that super high gain territory. But if you add a little bit of gain, the tube screamer or a pedal similar to that, then you should be fine and you can get a lot of rhythm and lead tones out of this amp. So this has gone on actually much longer than I anticipated. I wanted this to be a short video, but I love new Peavey stuff, so we're going to spend a little time talking about it. So this has been the Peavey Classic 212 amplifier. I believe it's from the 70s, but we'll have to double check on that. Overall, my first impressions are very favorable. I'm going to spend a little more time on this thing. I'm probably going to swap out the tubes as I get a feeling that they've never been swapped, or if they have, it's been a long time. So I think new tubes and maybe a little bit of attention on that reverb tank and some other aspects of these potentiometers will make this amplifier just ring. So I'm looking forward to that. So if you have any questions or experience with this particular amp or its future siblings, the Classic 30 or 50, then I would love to hear what you have to say. And as always, if you do like this content, feel free to like and subscribe. That always helps. So thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.